very special year for Volkswagen, as it celebrates 40 years of the Golf GTI. Welcome everybody to the Yuppies weapon of choice in the 80s, the Volkswagen volume seller that put Volkswagen on the map, the Mark II Golf GTI. Those three important letters, GTI. It was a byword for reliability and performance, as well as a status symbol, as well as also being guaranteed theft item, because these things were nicked all the time in the 80s. And let's face it, they were pretty easy to nick. And that soundtrack you were listening to there, the reason why I picked it was because it was called Every Day. And it makes sense to pick a soundtrack that's called Every Day because I use this thing every day. It's reliable, it never lets me down, it's economical, and also for the fact it's a performance hatchback at the same time. It does everything I want it to do. Whoever thought three letters would change the face of automotive history? Mark II Golf GTI had 112 brake horsepower, which doesn't seem a lot these days. Crikey, probably my lawnmower's got that. But back then, 112 brake horsepower was a lot. It did 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds and would reach a top speed of 115 miles an hour. Again, you're probably thinking that isn't a great deal these days, and it isn't, if I'm being quite frank with you. But people forget that it's down to the weight of the car that helps. So even though this thing has 112 brake horsepower, it only weighs 900 kilograms. One of the things I always loved when I was 17, 18 and I bought my first Golf GTI was the MFA trip computer that you have up front, which tells you things like the time of your journey, the miles you've done, the miles per gallon you're doing, oil temperature. And back then, that was something quite sophisticated, really. Today, we get a lot of that in cars. What I like also about this car is I'm now in fourth, put my foot down, revs build up nicely, now doing 55, 60, 65, 70 miles an hour, and it pulls nicely. And I think that's what a lot of people really liked about the 8-valve Golf, that it had flexibility in that rev range. The 16 valve was a little bit more that you had to knock it back down a gear to get the extra power out. The thing that I like about Golf GTIs was they lent themselves really well to tuning. So you could gas flow the heads, put a 1900 bottom end in, all the sort of things like exhaust systems, and you could get good horsepower out of them, really. And I think that was half the fun of owning the Golf, is that you had a Golf GTI very understated, still are, but you had a blank canvas to do the tuning on them. But I like the fact that I can be driving it 1 minute sensibly, put my foot down, and we've got some power. And it handles really well. For a car of this age, it handles really well. And the boot space is fantastic, in the sense whereby you get a couple of filing cabinets in the back. As you can see here, we've got a number of functions that the Golf GTI came with. So let me run those through with you. So what you've got there is the time of your journey, so that tells you how many minutes or hours the journey's taken. You've then got how many miles that you've got, your average miles per hour, your average MPG, the temperature of the oil, and then the ambient temperature. You've also got two settings. So you've got here is the setting of that particular journey, and then your average. So as you can see, one of the key features that I loved about the Mark 1 and Mark 2 Golfs is they came with these door pins that were shaped in the style of a golf tee. Who says that the Germans don't have a sense of humour? I really liked the fact that they thought about that, and people don't normally notice it, but it is a golf tee. Well, I'm under the impression it's a golf tee. Also, we have the golf gear knob, which again featured on Mark 1 and Mark 2s. They sort of stopped it when it came to Mark 3s and brought it back later on for anniversary models, and then it came mainstream again in sort of Mark 4, Mark 5s, particularly Mark 5. So I love that. I like that aspect. It's nice and chunky. It's a nice feel to it. And again, it's just a nice little addition to the car that finishes it off. It's those little attention to details that I really love. The thing you got in Mark 2s that you didn't get in Mark 1s was you got this height adjustable driver's seat. In the Mark 1s we never got that. Mark 2s, just pull the lever, and then obviously your seat comes down and reclines, which is a nice feature. You definitely got a little bit more leg room in the rear for Mark 2s over Mark 1s. Mark 1s was always a bit cramped in the back for rear occupants that were adults really, whereas Mark 2s definitely came with a better leg room. Put it out there and say this car, I hate to say this, overall is better than a Mark 1. No, that's quite controversial, especially that because I've got a Mark 1 Golf GTI. Now I love Mark 1 Golf GTIs, always have done, always will do, die-hard fan, and I might think differently when I get back in my Mark 1, but I personally think the Mark 2 is a better car.